Imagine a killer who breaks into a house, murders an entire family, and then sticks around for a few days to feed the cattle and cook himself dinner. That's not a horror movie. That actually happened. And it's not even the weirdest story on this list. Tonight we're walking through 12 real cases that were never solved, never explained, and in some cases, never even made sense. Grab a blanket, lock the door, and maybe leave a light on. Number 1, Hinterkaifeck Farm. Okay, so picture the most isolated farm in Bavaria. The kind of place where your nearest neighbor is a comfortable scream away. That's Hinterkaifeck. And in the spring of 1922, somebody walked onto that farm and murdered all 6 people living there with a pickaxe. The Gruber family and their brand new maid. Gone. And here's the part that'll keep you up tonight. The maid had literally just started the job. Her predecessor had quit months earlier because she was convinced the place was haunted. Turns out, she had excellent instincts. Now, the truly unsettling stuff started days before anyone died. Andreas Gruber, the head of the household, kept telling neighbors weird things were happening. He found footprints in the snow leading from the forest straight to the farmhouse. But no footprints leading back. Just one way, in. He heard footsteps in the attic at night. He found a newspaper in the house that nobody in the family had bought, and the house keys just vanished. If this were a movie, this is the exact moment the entire audience is yelling, "Dude, leave, pack a bag, go to a hotel, anywhere." But this was 1922 Bavaria, so leaving your farm wasn't really on the menu. And then it gets genuinely disturbing. After the killer did the deed, he didn't run. He moved in. The police later figured out the murderer stayed at the farm for several days afterward. He fed the animals, he kept the fireplace going, he ate meals in the kitchen. Meanwhile, the bodies of the family were stacked in the barn. Neighbors actually noticed smoke coming from the chimney and assumed everything was fine. The mailman delivered mail. Nobody clued in that the cozy little farmhouse had a brand new resident with a very dark hobby. When the bodies were finally discovered, the investigation went absolutely nowhere. Police questioned over 100 suspects. They even exhumed the victims' heads and sent them to a clairvoyant in Munich. Because hey, when forensics fails, why not? More than a century later, the case is still wide open. No name, no motive. Just footprints going one direction and a killer who apparently really enjoyed the rural lifestyle. My personal theory, whoever it was had been living in that attic the whole time. Sleep tight. Number 2, the Yuba County 5. This one gets called America's Dyatlov Pass. And honestly, that undersells how baffling it is. 5 young men, ages 24 to 32, all with mild cognitive disabilities or mental health conditions, went to watch a college basketball game in California. Afterward, they stopped for some snacks at a convenience store. Burgers, soda, candy bars, normal stuff, and started driving home. And then they just disappeared. 5 guys, 1 car, poof. Their car turned up abandoned on a snowy mountain road. And here's where your brain starts to hurt. The car was miles in the wrong direction. Nowhere near the route home. It wasn't out of gas. It wasn't broken down. It wasn't even stuck. Investigators figured 5 grown men could have easily pushed it free if it had been. For absolutely no reason anyone can explain, they left a perfectly working vehicle and walked off into a freezing mountain forest. At night, in winter, wearing regular clothes, without telling a soul. Months later, the body of one of them, Ted Whiteher, was found in an abandoned forest ranger trailer about 19 miles away. 19 miles. On foot, in the snow. He'd wrapped himself in bed sheets and died of starvation and the cold. And now the absolute gut punch. The trailer was stocked with food. Canned goods. Plenty of it. He never opened a single can. There were matches inside, and right outside the trailer sat a propane tank he could have used to heat the place. He had food, warmth, and shelter all within arm's reach, and he starved to death in a blanket cocoon instead. It makes no sense. It's like the survival instinct just got switched off. The bodies of 3 others were found scattered in the wilderness later, some closer to the car, some farther out, like the group had splintered apart in the dark. And the 5th man, Gary Mathias. Never found, not then, not now. His shoes were even discovered near one of the other bodies, which means at some point, this guy was walking through the snowy mountains barefoot, or close to it. So what happened? Why ditch a working car and march into a winter death trap? Why did Wayher die of hunger surrounded by dinner? Theories range from a psychotic episode triggered by panic to them fleeing something or someone they saw on that road, to a simple wrong turn that snowballed into catastrophe when 5 vulnerable men got scared and stopped thinking clearly. Nobody knows. The mountain kept its mouth shut, and it's never said a word since. Number 3, Axe Emmon of New Orleans. Every serial killer has a gimmick. This guy's gimmick was, and I cannot stress this enough, music criticism. In New Orleans, between 1918 and 1919, somebody started breaking into homes in the dead of night, mostly Italian immigrant families, and attacking people with their own axes. He didn't bring a weapon. He'd just grab whatever axe was lying around the house, do the deed, and leave it at the scene like he was returning a borrowed tool. He stole nothing. No money, no valuables. This was strictly a passion project. The city was terrified, obviously. But then things took a turn into pure theater. On March 13th, 1919, the Axeman sent a letter to the local newspapers, and the letter is unhinged in the most entertaining way possible. He claimed he wasn't a man at all. He was a fell demon from the hottest hell. A spirit, the worst demon that ever existed. Cool, very humble. Then he made an announcement. Next Tuesday night, he was going on the prowl again. But, and here's the kicker, he promised he would spare any home where jazz music was playing. That's right. The demon from hell had one weakness, and it was a good groove. So what did New Orleans do? The most New Orleans thing imaginable. The entire city threw a party. Every dance hall was packed to the rafters. Every house had a phonograph cranked to maximum or a live band hammering away in the living room. Restaurants hired musicians. People who couldn't carry a tune were suddenly very passionate jazz enthusiasts. The whole city turned into one giant nightclub out of sheer terror. And you know what? That night, nobody died. Either the Axeman was a man of his word, or he just couldn't find a quiet house to murder in. In the fall of 1919, the killings stopped as suddenly as they'd started. No grand finale, no final letter, nothing. The Axeman just clocked out. To this day, nobody knows who he was. Some think the whole jazz letter was a hoax by a local musician trying to sell records, which would honestly be the most diabolical marketing campaign in history. But the murders were very real. So here's the takeaway. In New Orleans, jazz didn't just save the night, it might have literally saved lives. Number 4, Max Headroom Incident. Quick change of pace. Nobody dies in this one. But it might be the strangest, most brazen crime in television history. And it's still unsolved. To set the scene, it's 1987, Chicago. Max Headroom was this super popular TV character, a glitchy, stuttering, computer-generated AI guy with slicked back hair and sunglasses. Very 80s, very weird. Hold that image. On the night of November 22nd, 1987, somebody hijacked the broadcast signal of 2 different Chicago TV stations. Not once, twice in the same evening. First, during a sports broadcast on WGN, the screen suddenly cut to a person wearing a Max Headroom mask, jerking around in front of a sheet of corrugated metal with no audio. Engineers scrambled and managed to cut it off after about half a minute. Crisis averted, right? Nope. A couple hours later, this guy popped up again, this time during an episode of Doctor Who on the public station WTTW. And this second broadcast is the stuff of internet legend. For about 90 seconds, the masked figure rambled complete nonsense. He laughed maniacally. He name-dropped a local sportscaster. He held up a Pepsi can and mocked Coca-Cola's slogan. He hummed a theme song, and then, I promise I am not making this up, the video ends with him bent over while someone off camera spanks his bare backside with a fly swatter. That's the grand finale. That's the whole show. Then it cut back to Doctor Who like nothing happened. Now here's why this isn't just a dumb prank. Pulling off a broadcast intrusion like this in 1987 required serious technical knowledge and expensive, specialized equipment. You basically had to overpower the station's signal from a transmitter, which meant knowing exactly what you were doing and having a small fortune in gear. This wasn't something you could whip up in your garage with a coat hanger and a dream. The people who did it had to understand how the stations beamed their signals, find the exact frequency, and physically outmuscle a professional broadcast operation. Twice, without getting caught in the act. The FCT investigated. The FBI got involved. They chased down leads for years. And despite all that firepower, they never identified the hacker or hackers. No arrests, no confession. Not even a solid suspect that ever stuck. Whoever did it had the skills of a broadcast engineer and the comedic sensibility of a 13-year-old. And they vanished without a trace, leaving behind 90 seconds of the weirdest footage on the internet and absolutely zero answers. Honestly, respect. Number 5, lead masks case. This one's got everything: forensics, conspiracy theories, UFOs, and a level of absurdity that nobody has ever managed to explain. August 1966, on a hill called Vintem near Rio de Janeiro. A teenager flying a kite stumbled onto the bodies of 2 men. They turned out to be Manuel Cruz and Miguel Viana, 2 electronics technicians who traveled in from out of town a few days earlier and told their families they were going to buy materials. Spoiler, they did not come back with materials. Now, the way these guys were found is where it goes off the rails. They were wearing formal business suits. On top of the suits, they had waterproof raincoats. And this is the part that made headlines around the world. Over their eyes, they wore heavy, homemade masks made of lead, the kind of lead shielding you'd use to protect yourself from intense radiation. Lying near the bodies were an empty water bottle, a towel, and a notebook. And the notebook had a chilling little to-do list written in it. 1630 be at the agreed place. 1830 swallow capsules. After the effect, protect metals, wait for the signal. I don't know about you, but swallow capsules and wait for the signal is not on my weekend agenda. So what actually killed them? Here's the maddening part. The autopsy found 0 signs of violence, no wounds, no trauma, nothing. But because of bureaucratic delays, the toxicology test never got done in time. The bodies had degraded too much. So nobody ever found out what was in the capsules they swallowed or whether they were even poisoned at all. The cause of death is officially unknown, and the city went absolutely wild with theories. Were they part of a secret religious cult performing some kind of ritual? Were they trying to make contact with extraterrestrials, using the lead masks to shield their eyes from a bright light they expected to see? Were they running an illegal radiation experiment that went sideways? The lead masks point pretty strongly at we were expecting something extremely bright or extremely radioactive. But which? 60 years later, 2 men in suits and raincoats and lead eye masks are still sitting at the top of Brazil's weird death leaderboard, waiting for a signal that never came. Number 6, Guarapiranga Reservoir Case. Fair warning, this is the grimmest one on the list, so if you're squeamish, maybe skip ahead. In 1988, at the Guarapira Reservoir in São Paulo, a man's body was discovered on the shore, and the condition it was in is what turned this into one of the most disturbing and disputed cases in forensic history. The body was completely drained of blood, not a drop left. But that wasn't even the thing that rattled the pathologists. The thing that rattled them was the precision. The victim's eyes, ears, and lips had been removed, along with internal organs, with what looked like surgical accuracy. We're talking openings in the body that were perfectly round and symmetrical. No tearing, no jagged edges, no signs of a struggle. The wounds looked almost cauterized, like the edges had been sealed by some kind of high-temperature instrument. People who saw the photos described them as looking less like a murder and more like something out of a sci-fi autopsy. And here's where it gets even murkier. The official police and medical report was classified, sealed away for a long time. Experts could not agree on what tool could even do this. A scalpel doesn't cauterize. A laser in 1988 in the field on a body by a reservoir with no power source, no operating room, no blood anywhere at the scene. It doesn't add up. Performing surgery that clean and that bloodless out in the open with no trace of where the blood went is the kind of thing that makes forensic scientists rub their temples and go, yeah, we got nothing. The wildest part of this case's afterlife is that the photos got tangled up with so-called alien cattle mutilation theories, because the round, bloodless, organ-removed wounds looked exactly like the stuff people report on mutilated livestock out in farm country. So you've got UFO believers pointing at it as hard proof that something not of this earth was running experiments, and skeptics on the other side insisting it was just a very skilled, very twisted human being with access to surgical tools and a deeply broken mind. And honestly, both of those options are bad. There's no comforting answer here. Either there's a person walking around capable of bloodless field surgery, or there's something else entirely doing it. Officially, the weapon was never identified. The method was never explained. The killer was never found, and no motive was ever established. Pick your theory. They're all unsettling. Number 7, disappearance of Varig Flight 967. If a Hollywood writer pitched this story, the studio would say it's too on the nose. But it really happened. In January 1979, a Varig Boeing 707 cargo plane took off from Tokyo, bound for Rio de Janeiro. On board, a crew of 6 and a very, very valuable cargo. 153 paintings by the famous Japanese-Brazilian artist Manabu Mabe, worth over $1.2 million. 30 minutes after takeoff, the plane stopped responding to radio contact. And that was it. It never showed up again. Now, normally a plane going quiet is a tragedy, but not a mystery. What cranks this one up to legend status is the pilot. The captain of this flight was Roberto Gilberto da Silva, and the man was a national hero in Brazil. 6 years earlier, he had managed to land another burning Boeing near Paris, saving a bunch of passengers. This was a guy who had stared down disaster and won. So you've got an elite battle-tested pilot flying a giant cargo aircraft, carrying a fortune in fine art, and the whole package just dissolves into thin air. And I mean dissolves. They launched a massive search effort. They found nothing. No wreckage, no debris field, no oil slick on the water, not a single life vest, not a seat cushion, not a scrap of cargo. A Boeing 707 is enormous. These things don't just evaporate. When a plane goes down, it leaves a mess. This one left absolutely nothing, like the ocean swallowed it whole and wiped its lips. So naturally, the theories went straight to the deep end. And honestly, I don't blame anyone. One popular rumor: the plane was secretly carrying parts of an intercepted Soviet Mi-25 fighter jet, and Soviet interceptors shot it down to get the evidence back before the West could study it. Another: a daring mid-air heist of those 153 priceless paintings, which would be the most absurdly cinematic art robbery in human history. Picture someone diverting a cargo plane just to make off with a fortune in modern art. There's also the boring but likely explanation that something failed catastrophically over the deepest part of the ocean, and the wreckage simply sank into water miles deep where nobody would ever realistically find it. That last one is probably the truth. But experienced hero pilot plus a fortune in art plus zero trace is the kind of equation that keeps conspiracy forums alive for decades. And you can't fully blame people for wondering. The paintings, the crew, the plane, all of it still missing, still silent, somewhere under the Pacific or somewhere else entirely. Number 8, ghost ship SS Ourang Medan. This is a maritime legend, and depending on who you ask, it's either a true story, a Cold War cover-up, or a campfire tale that got way out of hand. But it's too good not to tell. June 1947, in the waters near the Strait of Malacca, several ships picked up a distress signal. A radio operator, tapping out Morse code, sent a message that genuinely makes the hair on your arm stand up. All officers, including the captain, are dead. lying in the chart room and on the bridge. Possibly the whole crew dead. Then a pause. Then 2 more words. I die. And the signal went silent. An American ship, the Silver Star, responded and located the vessel. The Orang Medan. The rescuers climbed aboard, probably expecting injured survivors, maybe a fire, something explainable. Instead, they found a nightmare. The entire crew was dead. Every last one of them. Even the ship's dog. And here's the detail that earned this story its place in legend. There wasn't a mark on any of them. No wounds, no blood, no signs of violence at all. But they were all lying there with their eyes wide open, faces frozen in expressions of pure terror, arms reaching up towards something none of them could see anymore. Whatever they were reaching for, they took the answer with them. And then the ship itself decided to keep the secret. As the rescuers tried to hook up a tow line to bring the Orang Medan in, a fire suddenly broke out in the cargo hold. The crew of the Silver Star barely had time to get clear before a massive explosion ripped through the vessel and sent it straight to the bottom of the sea, taking every shred of physical evidence down with it. Convenient timing, right? Almost too convenient. So what happened? The leading theory is grimly practical. The Orang Medan may have been illegally hauling a cargo of wartime chemicals, nerve gas, or potassium cyanide left over from World War II. A leak could have gassed the entire crew, and then those same volatile chemicals reacting with seawater could have triggered the fire and the explosion. It fits. It explains the bodies, the lack of wounds, the fire, all of it. There's just one tiny problem. Investigators could never find a single official record that the SS Orang Medan ever existed. No registry, no paperwork, nothing. So either the perfect cover-up worked, or we've all been spooked by a ship that was never real to begin with. Number 9, Villisca Axe Murders. Back to the axe, because apparently the early 20th century had a real problem with this. On the night of June 10th, 1912, in the tiny town of Villisca, Iowa, somebody crept into the home of the Moore family and murdered 8 people with an axe. 6 members of the family, including 4 children, and 2 young girl guests who were staying the night for a sleepover. An entire household wiped out in the dark, in a town so small everybody knew everybody, and nobody heard a thing. The crime scene was frankly deranged, in a way that suggests the killer was in no hurry whatsoever. He left the axe behind at the house, same as our New Orleans friend. After the murders, he covered the faces of every single victim with cloth. He draped fabric over the mirrors and covered the windows, like he didn't want to be watched, or didn't want them watching him. And then, the detail that really gets me, in the kitchen, police found a plate of uneaten food and a bowl of bloody water. Read that again. The killer calmly washed up and made himself a snack before strolling out the door. He took a break. In the middle of a mass murder, he paused for a little me time. That is the behavior of someone who was very, very comfortable with what he'd just done. The investigation churned through several suspects over the years, and some of them are wild. There was a local state senator who got dragged into it. There was a traveling preacher named George Kelly who allegedly confessed under pressure, talking about how the killing was inspired by a sermon Slay Utterly and all that, but he later recanted and a jury acquitted him. There were theories about a serial killer riding the rails between towns, since similar axe murders were happening across the Midwest around the same time. Plenty of fingers pointed in plenty of directions, but more than a century later, the Villisca axe murders remain officially unsolved. No conviction. No confession that stuck. The house still stands, by the way. You can actually take a tour, and people pay good money to spend the night there, which tells you something about humanity. 8 people died in that house. In a single night, the killer cleaned himself up and ate dinner over their bodies, and then he simply walked back into history and disappeared. Number 10, Zodiac Killer. Some killers hide. The Zodiac wanted the spotlight, and he wanted to make the cops look like fools while he stood in it. In the late 1960s in Northern California, somebody started attacking young couples. 5 confirmed murders, 2 survivors who lived to tell about it. though the killer himself bragged in his letters that he'd racked up 37 victims. Serial killers are not famous for their honesty, so take that number with a boulder of salt. What set the Zodiac apart wasn't just the violence. It was the showmanship. He started mailing letters to the biggest newspapers in the area, opening them with his now infamous calling card. This is the Zodiac speaking. He signed off with his own symbol, a crosshair, like a sniper's scope laid over a circle. And then came the thing that turned him into a legend. The cryptograms. Coded messages full of misspelled words and creepy bragging that he challenged the public to crack. He was basically running a deadly escape room, and the whole state was a contestant. Here's the fun twist, though. One of his ciphers, the Z408, got solved almost immediately, and not by the FBI, not by some genius cryptographer. It was cracked by a regular high school teacher and his wife at their kitchen table in 1969. Imagine being the world's most feared killer, and your big spooky code gets unraveled by a couple grading homework on a Tuesday. The message? Basically a rant about how much he enjoyed killing. Charming. But his other big one, the Z340 cipher, was a tougher nut. That one stayed unsolved for 51 years. 51! It wasn't cracked until late 2020, when an international team of codebreakers finally got it. And surprise, more creepy ranting, this time about not being afraid of the gas chamber and collecting slaves for the afterlife. As for who he was, hundreds of suspects over the decades. The prime one was a guy named Arthur Leigh Allen, and the case against him seemed promising. Police even found a typewriter at his house that matched the one used in the letters. But the DNA didn't match. The fingerprints didn't match. The handwriting didn't match. So either he was the most careful killer alive, or he just wasn't the guy. The Zodiac's identity has never been confirmed, and the FBI still keeps the case open. Somewhere out there, the answer is buried, probably under a crosshair. Number 11, Somerton Man. For decades, this was Australia's biggest mystery, a case so layered with secret codes and Cold War spy rumors that it sounds like a Le Carré novel got drunk and wrote itself. December 1st, 1948, on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, a well-dressed man was found dead, propped up against a seawall, looking for all the world like he'd just dozed off. No signs of violence, no struggle. Just a guy in a nice suit, dead on the sand, with no ID on him whatsoever. And the details only got stranger from there. Every single label had been cut out of his clothing. The manufacturer tags, all of them, deliberately removed. Somebody really did not want this man identified. Then, in a hidden sewn-in pocket of his trousers, investigators found a tiny scrap of rolled-up paper. Printed on it were two words, Tamam Shud. It's Persian. It means ended or finished. And that scrap had been torn out of a rare edition of the poetry collection, The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Later, the actual book it came from was found dumped in a stranger's unlocked car nearby. And scribbled on the back cover of that book was a 5-line code that cryptographers still cannot crack to this day. The autopsy found an enlarged spleen and blood in his stomach. The pathologist strongly suspected some kind of rare, fast-dissolving poison. The kind of poison, you might say, that a spy would use. So for over 70 years, this guy had no name, no cause of death, a Persian phrase meaning the end sewn into his pants, and an unbreakable code linked to his corpse. Spy theories ran wild. And given that this was the dawn of the Cold War, and Adelaide was near a secret weapons testing range, who could blame anyone? Now here's the update. Because the original story always called this case totally unsolved. But in 2022, there was a real breakthrough. A professor named Derek Abbott, using DNA extracted from hairs still stuck in the plaster death mask made of the body, finally figured out the man's name. He was Carl Charles Webb, a 43-year-old electrical engineer from Melbourne. So after 7 decades, the Somerton Man finally got his identity back. But, and this is a big but, we still don't know how or why he died, what that 5-line code means, or whether any of the spy stuff was real. The face has a name now. The The mystery's still got a pulse. Number 12, brutal murder of Elizabeth Short. We'll end with the most famous unsolved murder in Los Angeles history. The case that basically invented the dark, glamorous underbelly of Hollywood as we picture it today. Elizabeth Short was 22 years old. She'd come to California chasing a dream, hoping to become an actress, like 1,000 other hopefuls stepping off the bus. The press would later nickname her the Black Dahlia, partly because of her fondness for black clothing, and partly riffing on a popular film at the time called The Blue Dahlia. She wanted her name in lights. Tragically, she got it, just not the way anyone would ever want. On January 15th, 1947, a local woman out walking with her child spotted something in a vacant lot. At first, she thought it was a broken store mannequin dumped in the weeds. It wasn't. It was Elizabeth's body. And what had been done to her is the reason this case haunts people 75 years later. She had been cut perfectly in half at the waist, completely drained of blood, and carefully, deliberately washed clean. Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth up to her ears, the wound known as a Glasgow smile, and the body had been posed. This wasn't a crime of passion or a robbery gone wrong. This was somebody making a statement. And here's the forensic nightmare. There wasn't a single drop of blood at the scene. None. Which means the murder and the dismemberment happened somewhere else entirely, and the body was transported and arranged in that lot like a grotesque display. The LAPD launched one of the biggest investigations in its history, questioning more than 150 suspects. The case got so much press that it brought out every lunatic in California. More than 50 people walked into police stations and confessed to the murder. All of them were fakes, either mentally ill or just desperate for a moment of fame. Imagine the detective's day. Yes, sir, you're the 43rd person to confess this week. Please have a seat. Officially, the Black Dahlia murder has never been solved. The leading belief among investigators is that the killer must have had medical or surgical training, because the way the body was bisected, a precise procedure called a hemicorporectomy, is genuinely difficult to do and requires real anatomical knowledge. Someone with a steady hand and a doctor's education did this. And then they melted back into the city, leaving behind a perfectly washed body, a slashed smile, and a name that Hollywood would whisper forever. The Dream Factory, it turns out, has a very dark cutting room.